You're going to love
You
this.
got no time.
You ready for
Welcome. I'm going to edit it out. Everything you're about to do, the welcome to Last Gen, edit it out.
You're going to love this crap. Well, let's get intimate. You
It's
ready?
also getting cut out.
No, you got to
Oh, no,
keep that
it's
in.
getting cut out.
Well, because I've actually never heard this fully. You've told me pieces.
Yeah, so it was probably, I think it was like 11 years ago now. Yeah, probably 11 years ago. I had just been really messed up on a bunch of different things. Just really doing everything you're not supposed to do, whether it was drugs, alcohol, pretty much everything.
Not returning your library books on time?
Yeah, I mean, Blockbuster is still looking for me to this day. Yeah. I was the reason they went out.
Yeah.
So, basically, we'll fast forward through the part. Pretty much, I detoxed. I got off of heroin and a couple other drugs, and moved to New York. Moved in with my uncle there. He's a pastor at a church in upstate New York, and got saved. Got linked up with Ted and Carolyn's ministry there.
How old are you? You're blowing through this pretty fast. How old are you at this point?
When?
So, I guess let's start from the beginning.
All right. So it started about 11 years ago. I just knew, I was at the end of my rope. So you kind of get to a point, and I would say this, that anybody who's on drugs that is still saying they're having a good time is either one of two things. Either A, they're really just starting to start messing around with doing drugs or drinking.
Yeah.
Or B, they're just lying because they know how big the problem actually is, and they don't really want you to know how big the problem is.
Right.
So I would say that there's one thing that irritates me the most because I've helped a bunch of people now that have been addicted to drugs, have got clean.
Right.
And there's one thing that drives me the most insane, and that's this. People's family members, when they're talking about drug addiction, drug abuse, alcoholism, anything like that, they always refer to it as the disease of addiction.
Yeah.
And I could see where, from the onset, people who have never been involved with anything like that may think it's a disease, I guess, but
right.
It's very truly not a disease.
Right. So basically, the people who say, I kind of heard John Mulaney talk about this on a podcast with Theo Vaughn, because they were talking about their heavy drug addiction, which I don't recommend you. I'm not endorsing
I wouldn't listen to that
whatever they say. I just happen to stumble upon it. And they were talking about that whole idea, Theo Vaughn, because they'd both been in heavy drugs. And Theo Vaughn was like, so do you think, it's an addiction, a choice, or do you kind of see it as, a disease? And so, basically, I guess that thought process that people say it's a disease is kind of, I guess it, takes responsibility off the person, because it kind of says, I've got no control over this. I'm presupposed to this drug. Yeah,
so here's the thing. There's two thoughts that people have. Is either a disease would be a hereditary thing,
right,
or a disease is a contagious thing,
right.
But I've actually put a fair amount of thought into why do people start doing drugs? Because I've had people ask me what was it that got you into drugs? Why'd you start doing that?
Yeah,
and it's so much simpler than what people actually think it is. What it really boils down to is that either A, you grew up in a small town, which a lot of people watching this probably do. They probably live in a small town currently, and there really isn't a lot going on.
Right.
Or B, they have some kind of pressure from an outside situation that they just don't know how to handle, and they don't know what to do with that pressure. So that's what it was for me. So I had I had a bunch of issues going on in our household. There was a bunch of different pressure coming from different directions.
Right.
Whether it's your parents, have stuff going on, or you and your siblings have stuff going on, whatever it is that causes that pressure, I honestly believe a major root to drug addiction or alcoholism is people have not done a good job at teaching kids how do you actually manage that? How do you deal with it? And I'm not talking about a therapist. I'm talking about people get this pressure and they're just I don't really want to deal with it. I just don't want to think about it.
So deal with pressures at home in specific, or are you talking about dealing with pressures of life?
Well, it could be different depending on the situation. It could be, say your parents are getting divorced.
Right.
And it's, for depending on how old you are, that's a terrible thing for a kid to have to go through. So they just don't want to deal with that. They don't want to think about it.
They kind of compartmentalize it.
Yeah. So it seems like and listen, you're not going to find anybody that gets into, that's just well, I'd never done anything, and then I tried heroin.
Yeah.
Went
straight
the
for
whole,
that H-boy.
gateway drug thing.
Yeah.
I guess you could say that, that's true. There is, gateway drugs, and, I mean, anyone that's done drugs is going to tell you, like, I have plenty of stories where it was like we were laughing, me and my friends, like there was fun things happening.
Right.
But you have to kind of look at the grand picture of everything and be like, okay, like, sure, there's fun times and like you laugh about things, but you have to like look at what was the actual detriment to like,
right.
The morning after or,
right.
So you look at all these things, and that's what drives me nuts about when people say it's a disease. Because one friend in particular that I helped, his mom was like, she read every book,
right.
she listened to every podcast, she was certain that like, she knew how to help him and all this.
Right.
And I just told her like, I can't help him and neither can you.
Right.
Because the only person really, short of deliverance, but like if you're looking at somebody that has no background in church, doesn't have anyone ministering to them, they have to want to change.
That's true.
There's no like, that's where you get the people, you see the stories where it's like moms are heartbroken because their child came home, robbed them blind, took everything. Because the kid didn't want to change.
Right. I think that ties in a lot. It's June, and I think that ties in a lot to the whole, LGBTQ mentality. I'm not saying like people addicted to drugs are gay, obviously. So don't clip me like I'm saying that. But I think it ties in because with any sin, it is a choice. And so like even the parallel with like people saying, well, I was born this way. Like I was born this way. I can't help it. I'm predisposed to this sin. But no Christian's even arguing like that you weren't. Like sure, maybe you maybe you were. Maybe drug addiction does quote unquote run in your family. But nobody's saying like because you were born this way, like that's okay. We're saying you have to be born again.
Yeah, it's not that it runs in your family, and that's what drives me. It's like, what were you exposed to?
Yeah.
What are your trained habits to reacting to outside pressure?
Right.
So if your family is the kind of family, and if it is, like, it's not anything you have to be ashamed about, you just have to understand, like, I've really done, over the last couple of years, I've worked hard at looking at every situation that I come into, and I try to almost, like, remove myself from the situation and look at it from, like, a third-person perspective and just be like, okay, so if this is happening, if I react like this, what is it going to do? If I react like this, what is it going to do?
Right.
If I give it no reaction whatsoever, is this one of those things that's going to blow over in, a day or two?
Right.
Because that's the other thing. Not every situation deserves like a major reaction. Some things will just, like you don't have control over every situation.
Right.
If you're a kid right now and you're listening to this and your parents are splitting up, you have no control over that.
That's true.
So like what is you getting into drugs and alcohol isn't going to better the situation for you, and it's not going to change the situation for them.
Yeah.
So, like, really, like everybody says, oh, well, it numbs the pain. Which you have to pay the bill on it eventually.
Yeah.
So when I see people that are involved in anything, whether it's drugs and alcohol, or like you said, like if it's you have a family member that's, confused right now and they believe that they're a homosexual or whatever it is, if those people... You can tell when somebody hits rock bottom because then they start turning their life around.
Yeah.
So the big difference with drugs is like some people don't hit rock bottom soon enough and they wind up overdosing. That was the hardest part for this one person that I helped is I told his mom, like, we can be there for him.
Yeah.
We can talk to him. And like, the end of the story is now he's 2 years clean. He's doing good. He's got a job. He's got a house, everything. But I told him flat out, I had a conversation with him. I said, don't call me anymore.
Yeah.
I've done everything that I can do.
Right.
So until you're ready
Yeah.
to be helped, just don't call me. When you're ready, call me.
Yeah.
Because I know there'll come a time when you're ready.
Right.
But I can't expend any more resource or energy because if you're just going to take it and then turn around and blow it on, like, if you don't want to be helped, then you can't be.
Right. And so there was a lot of pressure at home. You started getting into, quote unquote, the gateway drugs, right?
Yeah. So it's funny because I actually was just talking to a friend this morning on the phone, and we were kind of talking about, because we had a friend last year, a good friend of ours that overdosed.
Right.
And the conversation we had this morning was just like, you can almost remember, there's like different things, I wouldn't call them milestones, but there's like different events that you realize like that was a major downturn, and then things went downhill after this, and things went downhill after this. So you can almost watch these trends in your life where things start, it's almost like, they say there's like no honor among thieves, but like you'll meet somebody that, for instance, I knew somebody growing up that like sold pot.
Right.
But he was like, if you did other drugs, he was like, oh, you're a drug addict. And it's like, well, you're a drug dealer. But like everybody has a line that they won't cross.
Right.
And then you can watch people as they cross those lines where it gets to like,
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll do this now, but
Right.
I'm never doing that.
And for me, like in high school, it was like I'm vaping. That's not a drug. It's nicotine. You know, it's like caffeine. It's the same chemical. If people actually said that, like,
Yeah.
it's the same chemical makeup, and sure, I guess it is. It's the same chemical makeup as caffeine, except there's one extra. You know, whatever. And then it's just weed. It's not like cocaine or anything. And then people do go, well, it's not like heroin, you know?
Right. And then people are like, well, it's not like I'm doing crystal meth. And they move all the way
It's
down
just
the
like
line.
regular meth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the big thing that I had people that like ministered to me and brought
Yeah.
me to church. But
Right.
even then, like, God wants you delivered.
Yeah.
God doesn't want you addicted. He never planned for you to be addicted.
Right.
But like, you can have every person in your church stand around you in a circle and pray. And
Yeah.
if inside you're like, as soon as I leave here, I'm going to get high again, the prayer is going to do absolutely nothing. Like,
That's right.
God can touch your heart. He can change your intentions,
Right.
but he's not going to force himself onto your life.
Right.
So if you're, maybe today you're somebody that's listening that is like having a problem with addiction, or you have a family member that's having a problem with addiction, it is important that like the responsibility of that addiction is
Right.
on the person who's addicted.
So wait, so I'm actually asking because I really don't I don't know the details. I mean, I've known you for probably like 2 years now, but I never really had a like a full conversation about this. But so you said you started when you were 11, or like the conflict started at home when you were 11?
I think that, so I started, it's funny because I started out, the first thing I ever did that was like the cave on what you'd say like moral values.
Yeah.
Is I started smoking cigarettes at 11 years
Okay.
old.
So at 11 years old, how did you find cigarettes at 11?
Well, again, it's just one of the, like, I grew up in a small town. So it's like you go to high school, all the older kids are walking home
But
from
at middle
school.
school, you were 11?
Well, yeah, but all of our whole school system is
was
in
in one
building.
school, that's
So
right.
like you have, 11-year-old kids walking home with 17-year-old kids after
Right.
school. So, but it was like, again, you just cross one line
Yeah.
and then you just kind of keep picking the goalpost up and moving it down the field.
Right. So you started smoking cigarettes when you were 11, and then when did it kind of take the next step? Like, when did you move the goalpost?
It's tough to say like at what age everything happened, but I would imagine that for the first, I would say probably up until I was like 15, 16 years old, it was probably like most, and it sounds crazy because those are young ages,
Yeah.
but it was probably like most kids in most small towns. Like, there was parties that you could go to on the
Right.
weekends. There was always alcohol,
Yeah.
available and easy to get to. It's, it's like we've heard 100 times. Everyone I knew, both of their parents worked jobs.
Yeah.
Their parents were never around. Kids were going home from school, being
Yeah.
home alone.
Right.
So, I mean, the opportunity was there.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do feel that one thing that would have made a difference, and I'm not saying that it would have been like a complete, like, oh, I would never have done anything.
Right.
But I think that the biggest thing that people need to, like, if you have somebody that's younger than you that you, like, mentor,
Right.
you need to show them, like, how do you mentally handle different outside pressures in life? Because you're never going to live a life where you're, like, impervious to outside pressure.
Yeah, that's
There's
true.
always going to be different things.
Right, that's true.
So even, like, even if you're not serving God or you do serve God or whatever,
Yeah.
like, you're going to have pressure
Right.
coming from the outside no matter what.
Even if you did grow up in in the American dream and the white picket fences in the suburbs, you're gonna have pressure, whether be external or internal, because of external things. Like that's a given, and it's right. You do need to know how to deal with that outside of let's get high,
Yeah, and it's like now even more than ever. I think probably when our parents were younger,
Yeah.
they probably had that generation was a lot more churched than our generation
100%.
was, and. I mean, I'm not saying that would have cured everything because, again, like, you're only going to get what you're willing to actually get. If you're sitting in
Right.
church like, this is stupid, this sucks. But it wasn't even really, I mean, your household was probably much different than mine, but, like, it wasn't necessarily the most available thing.
Church.
Yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't like, I mean, my mom's side of the family was Catholic.
Right.
And then my dad's side of the family was not Catholic. They were, I mean, I guess they would be considered like Christian, but the churches they went to wouldn't have dealt with this.
Right.
They weren't like strong rooted churches that would have been.
And so had you ever, like in your teenage years, had you ever, growing up in small town Massachusetts, like heard of a Christian or a preacher or anything deal with like the deliverance aspect of Christianity? Like the supernatural aspect of Christianity.
I wouldn't say that I had heard of like the deliverance aspect of it. I had been to youth group.
Right.
I had been to Catholic church, which obviously, definitely didn't cover the topic.
Right.
But I remember when I started smoking cigarettes, I
Yeah.
told one of the youth leaders at one of the youth groups I went to one time, I was like, hey, I feel really guilty. I started smoking cigarettes or whatever. And his reaction, I'll never forget, because it's like one of those things that's like, that was the most useless piece of information. Because, like, I'm young. I don't know anything.
Right.
It's like my second time to youth group. He just goes, just tell the Lord and he'll deal with it. And it's like, what a useless piece of information for me.
Tell the Lord.
So like as a young kid, I don't know. So I go home and I'm just like, God, I started smoking cigarettes. And it's like, as if he doesn't know. Like I'm filling him in.
That's what those were?
Yeah. So it's like,
how dare you, Zach?
it's not necessarily something
funny.
that, maybe they, whoever's listening, maybe you don't have like a good church that would give you direction on that.
Right.
But I mean, it really does boil down to that. Like the decisions you make based on like the outside pressure. I can't think of anybody that I knew growing. I'm thinking now. I can't think of anybody I knew that like got onto drugs that didn't have like, some kind of major crisis on the outside. Even like friends that I had that were like vehemently against drugs would make fun of me for doing them. I can think of one friend in particular, and then like his brother died, and then his mom died, and then now he's still messed up.
Right.
Like, he was like so against drugs it wasn't funny.
Yeah.
And then his brother and his mom died in like a 5-year span.
So, like you'd started smoking, church wasn't a help. You weren't really like, immersed in youth group. You hadn't heard of the delivering aspect of God. So then you started getting into harder things, right?
Yeah. So once that stuff started happening, I mean, I don't want to say it was like a time warp, but like, there's a handful of years that seemed like they went by really, really fast.
Right.
And it did. I literally woke up one morning and it was like, it was just like it hit me like it was this weight that came on that was like, you have a choice to make.
Yeah.
And looking back now, it was really the feeling like, do you want to live or not?
Yeah. How bad did it get at the height of it?
I mean, it's tough to describe. I mean, I guess as bad as it could be. Like, I had stolen from everybody.
Yeah.
I'm
just saying because like a lot of people. So like me, outside of crime shows, I don't really have a reference point because I grew up in a house where like I didn't really know someone who was addicted to. Even in my school where people were addicted to nicotine and they smoked weed and stuff, I didn't know anyone that was like addicted to hard drugs. It's like what kind of like I don't know. I guess paint the picture for a homeschooler.
I
like,
guess it'd be funny because. Again, I'm not recommending you watch like mob shows or mob movies, but like I would say that the same way that mob shows like over exaggerate the lifestyle of like a crime mob or like a mafia family, the TV shows like over exaggerate the life of a drug addict. Like it's a very like mundane.
Yeah,
there's not really most of the time you like wake up and you spend the majority of your day figuring out like, okay, I know I got to get like a little bit of money up today, so that because here's the thing. Depending on what you get into for drugs, there's literally a point where
Let
you
me
reach.
teach you about drugs here.
Well, there's like a point you reach where it's no longer about like getting high as an enjoyment. It's that you do just enough so you don't get sick. Because you get very sick from like withdrawing from drugs. So you reach a point where it's like, at the end of it, it was not even like I wanted to be on them. It was just like, I just don't want to be sick today.
Right.
So I know that if I can't come up with at least $100 or $200 or whatever it is, like I'll be sick for the next 3 days.
Dang. So what was it that made the turning point?
Honestly, it's like I said, it's like tough to explain. It was just like I just woke up one morning and it was like I honestly felt like I was going to die. I felt like, man, if something doesn't change, I'm going to die. And it was weird looking back because all the people I know, and I know like a handful of people that have overdosed.
Right.
And like none of them had overdosed yet. But it's like I just had this feeling.
So you had it wasn't something that's like, oh, my buddy just died. I need to wake up.
No. It was just like a feeling where it had to have been God like showing me.
Right.
Like, you've got a serious decision to make now. Where you can continue down this path and not be able to turn back.
And so how many years had you been using drugs before that happened?
It was like 4 years.
4 years, okay.
Yeah.
And then so like what? It's like you woke up and you just
so I detoxed myself. I went and stayed at a friend's house. I got clean. I mean, I was like sick, laying on the floor for like 3 days, and I mean, but that's why I say like it was God because he had something for my life. Like
Right.
he had something for me to do. And if you haven't had that yet and you're listening and you like have that issue,
Yeah.
it's not, you haven't not had that because God doesn't have a plan for you.
Right.
But like maybe you just need to slow down for a minute and listen.
And I think that people hear stories like this with like major turnarounds and they think, oh, when's my time coming? You know, like they hear like this massive, like I woke up one day and I just felt something within me, and they're thinking, well, I haven't had that. So, you know, like I guess I'll wait until God shows me. But it's like people don't realize like you can be free when you're ready to be free.
Yeah.
Just like we talked about at the beginning.
And now it's tough because you don't even have to do anything different than what you're doing
Yeah.
every day to overdose now. You can just get a batch that somebody spiked.
Right.
You can, and people are like, well, I don't do heroin. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
anymore.
Now it's
You can get any drug that's been laced.
yeah, that's exactly right. You can
So-
get Adderall
Right.
that has, you know, Percocet in it. It's got, you know, fentanyl in it. I mean, that's just like that's an epidemic in America. And so, you know, there doesn't have to be this massive like sky opens up, clouds part, you know, Jesus descends. It literally has to be evaluate yourself.
Yeah, and I think another big problem that people have with it is like the size of the task, because people look oftentimes and
Yeah.
you know, the people I knew and me
Yeah.
look at like, okay, I've made a lot of mistakes over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
But you can't like, it's not like one for one.
Yeah.
Like for every bad thing you've done, you have
Yeah,
to do one.
right.
It's like you just have to worry about getting clean today.
Right.
Like you just honestly, if you're on drugs or you know somebody that is, like that's their first step is like you just have to worry about not doing them today.
Yeah.
And I'm not like an advocate for like, you know, one day at a time, but for the first like 3 or 4 days,
Yeah,
I
it's 1 day at
definitely
a
am.
time.
It's like very important the first couple days. But if you look at like the distance that I traveled in a short amount of time after getting clean,
Yeah.
it doesn't take long to turn your life around.
Yeah.
It really doesn't.
And it's crazy because how long ago was that?
Well, that was 11 years ago that I got clean.
So 11 years ago, but like when did you start? I mean, like when would you say that you I mean, like, you know, you've done so much. You're only 29. Like you started traveling with Pastor Ted at, you know, what, 5 years ago?
6 years ago, yeah.
6 years ago. So you'd only been 5 years clean then.
Right.
You started, you know, running a major youth conference, you know, like doing the administrative work for it, you know, like 2 years before that. And so
Yeah.
it's like,
And this is the other thing that I would say. It's really tough, and I had times where I felt like this because I youth pastored for a little while.
Yeah.
And I remember on my way to the first service that I was going to preach, I was like, what? Like, I have no business doing this.
yeah,
You know, and I really
Right.
felt like that for a while. But it's funny because as you move past these things, I honestly now, like, it doesn't even feel like I ever did. It feels like I'm telling a story about a different person.
really.
Like,
That's
it's like that
interesting.
person doesn't even exist anymore.
Right. It's almost like what the Bible says is true. You know, like that whole like old me, dead kind of thing works.
It would be tough if you would have told me, you know, 12, 13 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, everything the world teaches now about getting clean is that, like, you're an addict forever.
Right.
You know, like,
I mean, that's how they open up
that's
meetings.
their confession.
You know, my name's Alex. I'm an alcoholic. You know, like I'm on this step. It's just like it's completely. It's obvious that the world would love for you to be an addict forever.
Sure.
That's very obvious. I like the fact that we talked about the practical aspect of it and not just like, well, talk to God about it, bro. Tell
Right.
God. It's like, yes, but I'm glad I had him on because it's you need to see how at the same time easy it is. Like, yes, it looks like a massive test, but how easy it can be. You just woke up one day. Obviously, it was God, but you woke up one day and made a decision. Like, this is not my life anymore. You know, like the power of our decisions are more powerful than anything that the devil can do.
Yeah.
And so if that's you and you're listening to this, whether it be drugs and alcohol, pornography addiction, any addiction that you have, or anything that the devil's tried to, you know, get you to do as a habitual sin, like that's something that I hope this helped you today because, you know, it's not so much of a massive test that you can't do it. You know, like you can have a massive turnaround in such a short amount of time. So, Zach, would you pray for people who are dealing with that? You know, whether it be drugs and alcohol, you know, like the same story as yours, or you know, any other addiction.
Yeah, of
You know?
course. Lord, I ask you that whatever it is they're entangled with, whatever it is that the world would have them believe they'll never be free from, I ask that you would come down from heaven right now and touch their life. I ask that you would show them that there is a clear path out, that they do have another option, that they won't be another statistic. And even if it's not drugs, you may be listening to this podcast right now, and it may be something, like Alex said, maybe it's something that no one knows about. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe it's the fact that, whatever, maybe you're married and you've been cheating on your spouse. Whatever it is that feels like a bondage that's holding your life back, just know that you have an option. God has a plan for your life, and it's not for you to fail. It's not for you to struggle. It's not for you to be held captive by these things. It's for you to be free, for you to excel in life, for you to have everything that he's laid aside for you. So, Lord, just tonight, invade their life and show them that there's a better way. Turn their situation around and show them that they can have freedom in you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.